in a very simplified manner, actually almost to a level of my vernacular, that anyone, everyone should be able to understand it. So like Madam Morera said, my name is Stellah. I've been in the higher education, mostly in the universities, the most recent being Vista University. I have supervised several master's students in their theses, in their proposals, and I've also gone through the entire process of the master's, the undergraduate, the doctorate. So I know the challenges that we tend to go through when you're carrying out our theses and our proposals. So for this particular section, I'm going to be emphasizing on the research proposal. So like everyone knows that a research proposal, like Madam said, is the very first level that we need to undergo in the research proposal, in the research process. So before you carry out the research process, after the concept notes, after the approval of the concept, the very first step that you have to undergo, it's a research proposal. And this is the official guide that I want us to discuss today. So if you allow me, I would like to dive into the guide of the proposal. Just a minute. So a research proposal, like we just said, it's used to propose a research project or a sponsorship for a particular research. So when you're carrying out a research proposal, different institutions tend to have different instructions or different guidelines on how they expect the proposal to come up. But for this level, or the ideal, the shell of a research proposal, it ideally contains 3 main sections, or what you call the 3 chapters. That is the background or the introduction, the literature review, and the chapter 3, which is normally the research design. So as much as different institutions tend to have different outlines, different guidelines, the main shell that we can all follow are the 3 chapters: introduction, which normally carries the background of the problem, statement of the problem, the objectives, the hypotheses, and justification. Then we usually have the research review, which carries the theoretical review, the empirical review, the conceptual review, as well as the conceptual framework. And the 3rd chapter, the 3rd section, which is usually the research design, the target population, and what have you. Then at the end of it all, we normally have the referencing and appendices. What I would advise you, before you take the shell that I've given, it's important that you look at the guidelines of your institution. Reason being that I've seen some institutions, mostly in some of the Western countries, who tend to have the 3 sections mixed up. For example, I've talked about justification in section 1, but I've seen some bring it in section 3. I've seen some bringing the literature review in the 1st section before they go to the introduction. So this is just a shell, but I would advise that if you're in an institution, kindly always look at the guidelines that they follow. Don't just look what is given. This is just a guideline, but it can change depending on the institution. So if you allow me, I want us to look at these sections separately. What exactly do they stand for? What is expected for us? What are the do's and what are the don'ts? And like I've said, I would like to bring it in a very, very simplified manner, that if you don't get it, we'll go down to the vernacular. So this has to be very, very simplified. So what are these sections? What does they entail? So before you start a research, definitely you need to have a topic, or what you call a title, or what you call a problem. What exactly are you doing? What exactly do you study? What exactly is your research? So some of the guidelines, when you're coming up with a topic, I've seen some students really struggle telling me that, you have an idea, there is a dilemma. For example, COVID-19 is happening we have the pandemic in the world, and it's affecting businesses. But how can I study it? What are the areas that I can look at? How can I structure a topic from the pandemic? So there are different guidelines on how you can structure your dilemma, how you can structure what you're thinking about to make it a title. The first thing you have to understand is that the title is the first thing that captures the reader. The reader could be your supervisor, it can be your audience, it can be the entire country that is going to read your work. So how do you summarize your study? So I'll give you an example. I've just realized that we have the pandemic going on, the COVID-19. But COVID-19 is affecting so many things. It's affecting education, it's affecting businesses, it's affecting the health. but what do I want to look at? What do I want to emphasize in my study? So in your title, you have to summarize your main ideas. For example, I want to look at the effect of COVID-19 on the education sector in Kenya. So summarize your main ideas using the topic. And as you do your summary, it is advisable that you bring it down to 10 to 15 words. Reason being that if it's too big, you end up having unnecessary words. And I've given an example there. Someone will come and say that I want to look at a study to investigate the blah, blah, blah. A study to investigate the effect of COVID-19 on education. So it's so much, so many words that are necessary, and you need to capture the attention. So people don't have the time to go through all those words. So you have to be as brief as possible. And the most advisable, or what I would advise you, always look for 10 to 15 words. Also, don't be too brief. It's not a book. You can't come and say that we want to look at African economies. We want to look at COVID-19. So someone will be left asking, so what about the COVID-19? What about the African economies? I know this can work in a book, but when it comes to a research, to an academic research, don't be too brief. So when you talk about, I want to look at COVID-19, the question will be, what about it? So try to make it 10 to 15 words. And I'm sure by that time you'll be able to capture the attention of your reader. Also, avoid abbreviation when you're writing your topic. Remember, when you're looking at your area of specialization, there's one who said that they're doing anthropology. You have abbreviations that you know so well about, but your audience could be someone in a different background. My background is in economics, but I might talk about something like an abbreviation that someone who is doing gender, someone who is doing anthropology might not understand. So as much as possible, please avoid abbreviations in your title. So those are some of the guidelines that you might follow when you want to come down to your topic. Next thing that is very important when coming up with the topic of your proposal, you need to identify what are your variables. So a variable normally shows the relationship between a phenomena, a place, or the exact issue that you're looking at. So I have an example there, I hope you can see, and I'm talking about challenges facing high school students in Northern Kenya. And I'm posing a question. What relationship comes in your mind when you see challenges facing high school students in Northern Kenya? What are the variables? What relationship is coming in your mind? So if I can take the example of the first one, my main relationship is on the challenges, and they have the variables of the high school students in Northern Kenya. We have another one, effect of road infrastructure on rice farming. So if you're going to allow me, I'll ask someone to unmute and tell me what relationship comes in your mind when you read the third question, that is the effect of road infrastructure on rice farming. Is there any relationship that is hitting you or that is incoming in your mind? Please let someone unmute and give me the answer on that so that you can be at least participating in the discussion.
I think if rice farming is to be, like the rice has to be sold, so it has to be transported through roads.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would suppose it will be market accessibility and input accessibility as well.
Okay, so you can see a relationship in that. Anyone else? That person?
I think maybe when there's more infrastructure, there's increased maybe yields, or an increase in rice farming, or it makes rice farming better. An increase in infrastructure is an increase in rice farming, simply put.
Thank you, excellent. So what you can see is that I've not discussed anything, I've not given you any literature, but already you can see a relationship without even telling you more about it. Just from the title, you're able to identify there's a relationship. So the question would be, am I right or am I wrong? And that is what now we are calling the research, trying to find out what you're thinking, what Ojembo told us, that probably when the infrastructure is good, the rice farming you can transport and what have you. So why you want to carry out the research is to find out, is it true, is it not true? So your topic should be able to show that relationship. And anyone reading your work, they're going to get more anxious. They want to find out, so that is what is happening. There is this relationship. Then what is the relationship? And that is going to open your audience to go ahead and read further. So I know I'm talking about some words of independent and dependent variable. And from my experience, I've seen some, it's quite confusing, trying to tell which exactly is an independent, dependent variable, what is an variable. So if you look at the two, it is very important that before you come up with your title, you're able to differentiate between the two. I know we have other variables that we're going to be discussing much later, but these two are the main important ones. Anytime you think about a topic, anytime you have that dilemma hitting your mind, ask yourself, what is my independent and what is my dependent variable? So we are saying that when you identify the meaning that is implied by the two, independence, dependence, independence, dependence. So there's a meaning that is implied by the terminology that should be able to tell you the variable. Yes, so I know I'm still confusing you. So let's look at an example. In very simplified way, the independent variable causes a change in the dependent variable, but the opposite cannot happen. So for example, if I want to look at two variables, let's talk about the height of a person and the shoe size. So you're going to tell me that the taller you are, the bigger your shoe size is. But your shoe size cannot influence your height. So if I'm going to wear a bigger shoe size, it cannot influence how tall I am. But how tall I am can influence my shoe size. So we are saying that the independent variable causes a change in the dependent variable, but the opposite is not true. The opposite is not possible. So I'm going to give the first example, then we can look at another one. The effect of road infrastructure on rice farming in Tabora in Tanzania. So if you look at this, my road infrastructure is affecting maybe productivity of rice in Tabora. So the road infrastructure becomes my independent variable, and it is affecting, or the rice farming is dependent on the road infrastructure. So the independent causes a change on the dependent. So once again, I'm going to call for participation, and you're going to look at the third one, the impact of training on salary of employees. So can someone help us identify which one is the independent variable and which one is the dependent? Please, let's have someone unmute and tell us on that.
The training becomes the independent variable, and the salary becomes the dependent.
Perfect, excellent. So in this case, our training is affecting the salary of the employees. So training is the independent, salary is our dependent. So what we are saying is that anyone who is reading your title, they should be able to see an independent variable and a dependent variable. If that doesn't happen, then something is wrong with your title and you need to go back and rephrase it.
Susan, can I ask you one thing?
Yes, please.
This is Marco. Hi. The question is, you say that it's not possible for it to be the other way around. How? So we have roads and rice in Tanzania, but what if the rice harvesting or the increase in rice production has an effect on how the roads will be built? Isn't it possible to have such a conclusion in our work in the end as well?
Yes, so that is possible, but what I would say is that it becomes a totally new topic from what you're looking at, because in this case, we are saying that our rice farming is affecting the development of the road infrastructure. So that is a totally different topic than the one that I had said earlier. So it is possible, but it becomes a totally different study, a totally different topic, a totally different title. I hope I've answered you, Marco.
No, but my question is, I mean, if the title remains the same and in the course of research, we establish the backward, like a backlink, like a back to the independent, to independent.
I know what he wants to ask, but girl is not quite.
Who is talking? Marco is talking.
Yeah, actually I was. I mean, what I'm saying, when you get into research, you do have certain expectations, but you may find out something else to be true as well. For instance, your independent variable is one thing, and then you have a dependent.
Okay, so I think I understand what you're asking. So we are going on with the same topic, that is the effect of road infrastructure on farming. But once you carry out your study, you realize that it's the other way around. It's actually the rice farming that is affecting the road infrastructure. So yes, it is possible. And actually, that means you have achieved one of the objectives of your study. Because remember, a research, you don't really have the whole idea. You don't really know what is happening. That's why you are hypothesizing. You're making an intelligent guess. And like any other hypothesis, at the end of your study, you're going to say that you've come to find out that actually it is a rice farming that is affecting the road infrastructure. So it is possible, but that has to be stated at the end of your research that these were your finding, that the opposite is actually true. So that means that yes, you will have achieved the objective of your study because you'll have unveiled something new than what has been done earlier. So yes, it is possible. Is it clear, Marco, now?
Okay, yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I muted you, Marco, by mistake. Was there someone else who wanted to say something?
No problem.
This is a learning space, and we learn more by asking, by giving views. I think someone was talking, but I didn't quite get. If you're not ready now, don't worry. You can just tell us when you're ready. Continue, Stellah.
All right, so some of the tips, things you can avoid when it comes with your title, avoid overdone subjects, because the question is, what exactly are you bringing in light? The reason for your research is to bring new information. So if you do something that has been done over and over and over again, then you're not really adding much in the research field. So avoid overdone subjects, avoid controversial subjects, especially if you're doing it at an academic level. I know that some of these controversial subjects can be quite interesting, but it is advised that if you're doing the academic level, whereby your sponsorship is not as large, your resources are not quite as large, avoid controversial subjects. So very fast, let me have one person. What do you think is a controversial subject? An example. One person, please unmute and help us understand one controversial subject in your own opinion. Anybody?
Yes, to me, I think that when you try to research into an area that has to do with spirituality, for example, maybe the existence of witches and wizards, or how they it is something that I think when you want to research into it, you have problems.
Exactly. So I've actually faced in my experience, the time I wanted to do a research on spiritual matters, and that was one of the things also that it can be a bit controversial. Something else is politics, whereby you have one side. For example, you want to give a side to your political beliefs or political opinion. It can be a bit too controversial, especially on the academic level. So as much as possible, and this can be guided, it's different from one person to another, but as much as possible, avoid some controversial subjects. Don't be too vague, don't be too narrow. So when you want to discuss, avoid very narrow problems whereby your answer is just direct. There's nothing to build the anxiety or the need for someone to learn more. So don't be too vague, don't be too narrow. And I hope that is quite self-explanatory. And also ensure the problems you're giving, they're feasible and they're familiar. And like I said, you're going to need this much later when you reach on your research design area, whereby you need something that it's possible to be done and it is familiar, you can get some literature about it. So those are some of the tips that you can follow when you're coming up with your research topic. So still on the section 1, after coming up with your topic, you need to come up with a background of the study. And this is where you have a very simple review of your existing literature pertaining to the topics that you're coming up with. One of the tips that I would give coming up with the background of the study, try to use the inverted pyramid. So what I mean by the inverted pyramid, you have your title, you have your problem that you're looking at. What is a global view about that issue? After the global view, go down to the regional view. What is happening in the region pertaining to that problem? Go to the country view, then to your specific location. So if I want to look at the effect of COVID-19 on education, I might want to look at the global view first. What is happening globally? What are the SDGs that are talking about the pandemics and the education? Then from there, I might come to Africa. What is happening with COVID-19 in Africa? Then I want to come down to, assume I want to look at Kenya. I'll come down and explain how is COVID-19 in Kenya. Then from there, I'll narrow down to my very specific location. For example, I'm looking at Nairobi. What is happening in Nairobi? So if someone is looking at the background of your study, I'm going to be looking at your review at the gaps globally, regionally, countrywide, then now down to Nairobi, or that is now my specific location. So the inverted pyramid can be a very good tip when you're coming up with your background of the study. Then from there, one of the most challenging part is coming up with a problem statement, because without the problem statement, then you don't need the research. So the first thing someone will ask when you look at the topic, is there really a problem? What is the problem? And that is what you explain in the problem statement. So to put it very clearly, when you're writing your problem statement, you need to put your problem in context. What do we already know about the problem? And the big tip I'm giving you, for you to identify what that means, ask yourself, where and when does this problem arise? Who does this problem affect? What attempts have been done to solve this problem? So if you're able to explain those ones in your problem statement, then you can bring out the issue or what exactly it is that you're trying to research. Then still on the problem statement, you need to come up with what is the precise issue that this research needs to address. So as much as the COVID-19, so what? What is the precise issue we are trying to look at in the research? That's still in the problem statement. So when you're coming up with this, it is very important that you back up your claims. I might not come and say that COVID-19 has affected education in Africa. The question someone will ask, who said that? How do we know it is true? So everything that you give, if I want to say it's a problem, it is happening at place XYZ, you have to back up the claims that someone else has said this, or maybe come up with maybe the World Health Organization. So this is research, everything needs to have a backup claim. You have to claim it, you have to give a backup to the claim. Who has said that, or how do we know it is a problem? Still on the same, you need to show the relevance of the problem. So yes, it is happening, but why do we need to solve it? Then you need to set the objective of the study. So what do we need to achieve from this particular study? So this is showing the gap between the current status and the desired. So like I said, when you're coming up with the research proposal, be very, very careful on the problem statement. This is one area that some people get stuck for months and months. But if you follow this particular procedure, then it becomes much simple. And I have an example there. We can look at it, then we can discuss through it. If I'm looking at the performance of students in Nairobi, Kenya, so forgive me for using Nairobi a lot, it's because it's my area, but you can replicate it with your location. So I'm talking about the performance of students in Nairobi, Kenya has been decreasing over the past 10 years. So I need to back up that, who said that? So have an author who said that it has been decreasing the past 10 years. So in context to other capitals in Africa, according to a survey by XYZ, the performance is worse among the male students over 17 years of age. So from there, I'm showing who is being affected, and up to there, you can tell exactly what I want to study. It is the poor performance among the 17-year-old males in Nairobi. Then there has been some effective attempts to find the issue affecting this group. So what has been done about it? Some attempts have been conducted. And in the last 2 years, there's been a slight improvement in some parts of Nairobi, but the interventions are not significant. So I want to bring the objective. The aim of this research is to investigate 1, 2, 3, for us to identify the most significant factors. So you're trying to bring out who is being affected, where is it being affected, when is it being affected, like I've said about the 10 years, and at the end of it, you want to show what do you need to achieve from your particular study. Like I'm saying that you want to investigate the factors that leads to the poor performance and to identify the most significant factors. So if you're able to follow they should help you to come up with a problem statement. So that has been so wordy. So before I continue, let me have someone react on the problem statement before I continue. Somebody please unmute and just react about that before we go on. Anyone? An addition? A question?
Let's
think,
engage.
Stellah,
Yes.
can I phrase a simple question?
Yes, please.
At this point, thank you very much. You're very clear, very audible. I like that.
Thank you.
I feel a bit at a loss when I remember your first part of the presentation when you presented to us the parts, the component of our proposal.
Yes.
Statement of the problem, if I didn't miss it, came almost toward the end of the literature review. At what point would Elana be able to present a statement of the problem, to be able to say exactly what they have seen is the problem? I'm linking the shell,
yes,
and
yes.
now what we are going through now.
Yes.
Kindly respond to that.
All right, so I've brought us back to the slide whereby we are looking at the sections. And on the section 1, we are saying that that is where we are stating the problem. So remember, at this level, it's just a statement of the problem. But for us to now come up with the research, we are going to be trying to find out exactly what this problem is. Are we really come up with a problem or not? So at the end of it, remember our proposal, we have not yet gone to conduct the research. So we are just explaining what we intend to do. But once you get to the field, which is now on the report part, you can be able to come up now and find out the solution. What solution have we found about these particular problems? So on the chapter 1 on the section, we are identifying, we are stating the problem, what we feel is the problem is. But at the end of our research, which is happening at the chapter 5 or at the end of the report, now we'll be able to come back and comment on what we have found out after carrying out the empirical literature on the issue. So it is not, it's not in the literature review, but in the introduction part. But when we are going to be commenting about what we found out, that is after doing the empirical research, which is now on the report, and it comes in chapter 5 of the study. Dr. Josephine, I don't know if I've answered or not yet.
Thank you. Yeah, you have. You have, but I am also looking at it like it means that the student has to do quite good enough literature review to be able to come up with a clear statement of the problem.
Very true. Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Anyone else? Okay, so taking us back to the problem statement. So after the problem statement, we need to come up with the objectives of the study and the research questions. I've put the two together because normally research questions, they emanate from our research objectives. However, I might want to comment that on this section, we need to separate on exactly, are you quantitative or qualitative? And based on that, I want to say that when you're coming up with your topic, it is very important for us to have the end at the beginning. So what do I mean? As you start to conceptualize how your study will be, what is your topic, it is very important to start asking yourself, where will I conduct this study? What process will I use? How will I do that? Reason being that, as much as I'm going to comment about the quantitative and qualitative much later in the third section, it can influence how you come up in the first section. So I'll give an example. If I want to look at effect of, I'm using the pandemic because that's what we are facing currently, so allow me to do that. I want to look at the effect of COVID-19 on education sector in Kenya. So I want to think, where will I carry out the study? What do I want to achieve? Who will I be asking the questions? Remember, I'm still on the topic, but I'm thinking at the end. So please remember, as you start your study, always have the end in mind. Always have the end of your study in mind. Then you can keep changing as you continue. So that's what I'm saying, that once you come up with the objective, what do you want to achieve with the research? You want to ask yourself, is it quantitative or qualitative? Because this is going to influence whether you want to come up with research questions or research hypotheses. So I don't want to jump too far. Let's go down to the objective first. Objectives, they're about what you want to achieve in the research, and they need to be linked to the research question. Always ensure that the objectives that you come up with are achievable, because this is what is going to influence the entire study. Your entire study is going to be linked on your objective. So if I say that I want to look at the effect of health access on performance of teachers, yeah, so that is going to influence how my entire study will be. So always have the end at the beginning, and that is what the objective is coming in. So once you have your objectives, you can now frame your research questions and your hypotheses based on the objectives. So let me put that in an example to avoid having too many words. Assume that the topic that I have in mind, they're the effects of organizational culture on profitability of a business, in the case of Safaricom in Kenya. So the first objective that I want to achieve, one thing I want to do with this study is to analyze the nature of organizational culture at Safaricom Kenya, and listen to the language you're using to analyze, to find out, to establish. So that is very important to guide you when you're coming up with the objective, because that is what you want to achieve. I hope you can see the word that I keep repeating through all of them. So if my objective is to analyze the nature of the organizational culture, I can frame that to a question if it's going to be qualitative. What is the nature of the organizational culture at Safaricom Kenya? That can become your research question. I can also use the same to come up with my hypothesis, which in this case could be the null hypothesis. When you start looking at the analysis, you're going to differentiate the hypothesis, the null, and the alternative. So from this objective, I can still frame it to make an hypothesis out of it. For example, I can look at, if you look at the impact of Safaricom's organizational culture on the employee's performance, I can come up with an objective from there, an hypothesis, and frame it like Safaricom's organizational culture has no impact on the employee's performance. So what I'm making from this hypothesis is an educated guess that it has an impact. So what I want us to mark from there to make things easier, from your research objective comes your research question, comes your hypothesis. That's one of the simplified ways for you to phrase the three of them. One, if you have the objective right, you'll have your question right, and you'll have your hypothesis right. Simply put. Any question on that? Any reaction?
Nancy,
Yes.
Yes, Nancy, go first.
Yeah, I just wanted a confirmation or just clarification from the hypothesis presentation.
Yes.
We have the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis.
Yes.
How do you determine which one to put, or do you put both? Because we have instances where we use the null hypothesis, and then we have instances where we use the alternative hypothesis, and there are some studies that have seen that they put both. So I'm not sure what guides us, what would guide us properly as to how to go about the hypothesis.
Yeah, actually that happens, and it is very common, but the advice I'll give is always look at your institution's guidance. Reason being that I've also seen the same thing that you're talking about. There are some studies or some institutions that advise you put the null and the alternative together. Others, like the ones I've experienced, they normally look at they say that just put the null hypothesis, because once I give you the null hypothesis, you can already tell what is my alternative. So I would ask you, always look at your institution's guide. Some they want the alternative, others want the null, others want both. Kindly follow up with the institution, find out what exactly do they expect according to their guidelines.
Hi, Stellah.
Hi.
Just a quick one. What is the logic behind having both the objectives and the hypothesis? And is it a compulsory from a research perspective, not really necessarily with the institution requirements?
Yes.
taking away the institutional requirements, why should we have both objective and hypothesis and research questions?
So what I feel, because normally the objectives and the hypotheses are normally there, and it's up to you because you're a researcher. That's why you know that hypotheses and objectives are the same. But I would like to take you back to a person who has not gone through the education, the research study that you've gone through. They don't really know that the two are more or less related. So why you feel that it's from your, I'll say it's from your background, because you understand that the two are related. But from a person who has not gone through the study or gone through the research methods course like you've done, they would not really know the two are guided. So remember that objectives, they normally tell the audience or the person who is reading what you expect to achieve from this study. But your hypothesis, yes, you expect to achieve this, but my intelligent guess is 1, 2, 3. So they are very different, but why you feel that it's because you already understand that the two are related, but not all audience members expect, because the reasons or the importance of the two are very different. 1, you're giving expectation. 2, you're making your intelligent guess. So they are very different things. Anyone else? All right. So, yes, please.
Sorry, Paris, you okay?
Yes, thank you. I'm okay.
Okay, so I want us to jump to the next level, that is the literature review. And this normally, ideally, in a shell, it normally comes in the chapter 2 of your proposal. So the literature review, it's a review of the sources that are related to your topic. They can be books, they can be websites, they can be articles, they can be newspapers. So there are different scholarly sources. What are these saying about your particular study? So what we normally say is that academic research, you're not inventing the wheel. From the issue, the problem you're looking at, someone else has done it, someone else has talked about it. Not exactly what you're doing, because we don't advocate replicating what has been done, but something related to your study, someone else has done it in the past. So this is why you bring it out in the literature review. So if you go back to our example that you've been using about the COVID-19 and education, as much as no one has done the effect of COVID-19 on education in Nairobi, if I assume that, but someone has talked about the COVID-19. Someone has talked about pandemics and education. Someone has talked about the effect of health issues on education. So you want to discuss this. What has the past scholars talked about the particular problem that you're talking about? Secondly, you need to bring out the relationship of your study to others. This is what I'm studying. Others have studied ABCD. So what relationship is there? And very important, as you bring out your relationship, this helps you to identify the gaps, which are going to help you when you're doing your analysis in chapter 4 and chapter 5. So if some people have talked about the COVID-19 and businesses, and I'm looking at COVID-19 and education, so there must be a relationship. These people talked about businesses. There is a gap because there is still the aspect of education. So literature review, it brings the relationship of the study, and as you show the relationship, you're able to identify the gap. And this gap is what makes it important that you're carrying out this study. Because if you're doing what others have done, then why do you need the study? You're coming in to fill the gaps that have been left by the earlier scholars. Still on the same, it shows you the new ways of interpreting the new research. If they conducted the COVID-19 in education, maybe they interpreted it differently. What else can I bring in as a scholar? What else can I bring in as a researcher? So I have to really look at what others have done for me to show what new thing am I bringing in. It also helps us to know what has been done to avoid duplication, and I said that, and also to illustrate what can future researchers bring in, what can future researchers introduce. For example, if I can see people have done COVID-19 and business, and I've brought in COVID-19 and education, so I can see there's a gap that is coming in. What about COVID-19 and preschool? And this is what I can recommend future researchers to come and make. So basically, by looking at what others have done, it guides you on your current work and also helps you to advise on the future researchers. And all that comes under the literature review. So under the literature review, we normally have 3 sections. You bring in the theoretical review, you bring in the empirical review, and you bring in the conceptual review. So I'm going to shortly explain the 3. Theoretical reviews, basically you want to examine the theoretical background of your study. And one way that you can do it, or one of the simplest way you can do it, is to establish the theories that exist in the particular issue that you're discussing and the relationship in them. And as you bring in your theories, you want to show what gap is there, what different thing is your study bringing in. So if I want to look at the theory of change, the theory of change talks about ABCD, but I have to bring in the gap. What is that different thing that my study will be bringing in from the theory of change that ABCD has done? So theoretical review is very important because from it, you can also bring in a gap that exists. So one of the tips I normally give, I've seen students asking, okay, I've been trying to put through theories. How do I know theories? Do I have to know all the motivation theories there are for me to choose one? And the answer is no. You don't have to have all the theories in your area of study. If you're doing development, you cannot know all the okay, you can know, but not really all of them. You don't have to know all of them for you to come up with the theoretical review. So one of the tips I'll give you, online research always helps. Go to online, sorry, go to Google, just bring in the issue. For example, I'm trying to look at health and education. So if I research on that, I can see theories that come. And once I read on the theories, you can choose the one that is most related in your study. Sorry, I think I lost my video. Then from there, you need to show what gaps that exist. So I've given an example of how you can frame a theory to show the gap that exists. So I have a theory of change that I'm looking at in my example, and I've tried to frame a gap that arises from it. While this theory, that is a theory of change, focuses on the general households in a society, the current study, that's the one that you're doing, will focus on the more micro level by examining the effects of road infrastructure on productivity of small-scale rice farmers in Tabora. So yes, I've given you the theory of change, but what am I adding to this theory? And that is how you frame it. So can you give me?
Stellah, you can take a little break. Sorry. Anyone with a question, a contribution? I think what Stellah is focusing on is issues that have been a problem for most people to conceptualize, to apply, and to even understand the logic behind it. So anyone is welcome to add on or to contribute or ask a question.
Hi, let me ask a question. When doing the literature review, does it mean we have to include all 3, the theoretical, the empirical, and the conceptual review?
Okay, good question. Who would like to take it up before Stellah comes? I think for me, in my view, okay, Stellah is here. Yes, Stellah.
No, finish on your view, Aurel. I want to hear it. I want to hear your view first.
I think my approach to research has always been not very must do's and must not do's. There has to be a logic behind. So, for instance, if I'm doing a topic, it would be nice to see what kind of theoretical lenses have been used and some of the gaps there. I would justify that way. Then if I'm also doing a study, maybe I'd like to see an empirical analysis, what other studies have found. So I think you can do them, but I think you just have to justify why you need to have the 3 there and show how you're using them. But over to you, Stellah.
Yes, I actually agree with you. It's not written on board that you need to have the 3. But what I can assure you is that when you write your literature review, you don't really have to have a subtopic, theoretical review, empirical review, conceptual review. But when you're explaining, I can assure you almost 100%, you bring in an empirical and you bring in a conceptual. For example, if I come and say that education was started in this and this year. Students have been enrolling for this age. According to a study by Madam Munene, she found out that ABCD. So what you can see is that I've brought a conceptual and I've brought an empirical without even telling you that it's empirical. I can assure almost 100% that you tend to have the three, but you don't really have to have the subtopic, theoretical, conceptual, empirical. You don't really have to have that. It's not written on stone. But somehow within your discussion, it will always come out. Because anytime you say that a study by ABCD, that's already empirical. By the time you explain what organizational culture is, you've brought in the conceptual. Then theoretical, that one is very important. It gives weight to your study. Remember, you also want your part to look good when people see it outside there. So it gives weight once you put a theory and show a gap that you're bringing in. I hope we've answered that.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. So when you talk about the, okay, something is wrong with my thought. So one of the tips that I would give when you're doing your literature review, that is chapter 2, always try to organize the discussion according to your research objectives. So if you have 3 objectives or 3 questions, let's have at least them showing how you're discussing each of them. If you have 4 of them, have at least those 4 subtopics on your literature review. So very important, you organize your literature review according to your research objectives or research questions. So then we have the conceptual framework, very, very important, and one area that most students get stuck on. So the conceptual framework is an illustration. You're trying to bring out your research in an illustration where someone can just look at it and they can tell what you're studying, what are your variables, what are the relationship between the variables by just looking at the picture or the graph that you present. So the conceptual framework shows the relationship between your variables. They can be independent, they can be dependent, they can be moderating, intervening, and others. My big tip is that avoid overdoing it. The more you overdo it, you might find yourself stuck much later in your study. So if you can have independent and dependent, that is compulsory, then choose either a moderating.
Don't worry. I think because of talking for a long time, we understand. Don't worry.
Thank you for that. So either choose a moderating or the intervening. Don't put yourself in a hole whereby you have so many variables, because at the end of the day, you have to test all of them. So you can choose a moderating, an intervening, then compulsory, you have independent, and you have dependent variables. So one tip that I found most students confusing, what is a moderating, what is an intervening? A moderating variable, it looks at the influence or the strength between the independent and dependent variable. So think of it as a third party, or what you call a third wheel, between the dependent and the independent. Then the intervening, it shows the relationship between the independent and dependent. So in this case, you can call it a middleman. So it just comes in the middle of it, and it is quite hypothetical. So like I said, to avoid too many words, an example, if I want to look at relationship between being poor and a short life. So being poor is my independent variable. The short lifespan is my dependent variable. So the intervening variable can be nutrition. So nutrition is coming in as a third party, and we can measure it. Meaning that being poor, yes, brings about short lifespan, but this can be influenced through nutrition of the individual. So that becomes a third party, and you can also measure it. But the moderating, it can be something like race. So being that, yes, being poor and having a short lifespan, they are related, but we have a middleman. We have something that influences the two. Something like race, where we talk about the blacks and the whites. something like gender, maybe the male tend to be affected more than the female. So you can, when you're doing your research, when it comes to the conceptual framework, I always advise, choose one. Do you feel that it's more strong to use a moderating variable, or it's more strong to use the intervening variable? If I'm looking at the example we had of road infrastructure and rice farming, maybe I feel that this influence cannot really work without the government policy. So the government policy in this case becomes my moderating variable. Yeah. Or you can think that, let me use the intervening variable instead of moderating. So the fewer it is, the better for you at the end, because any variable that you state, it must be tested at the end of your research, linking the end at the beginning. So when you show this relationship graphically, that becomes a conceptual framework, and it always comes at the end of the literature review. Very, very important. It's a very important aspect of your chapter 2 of the proposal. So any question on that or reaction?
Can I ask one question? It's Marco again. Yeah, our specific research objectives is defined. Can there be intervening variables in their own right? For instance, if we have some independent or moderating variables, so we have the specific objectives defined, could they be influencing the strength between the independent and dependent variable? So that very thing. So I don't know if I make myself clear enough.
Not really, not really.
We have defined our objectives. There's an overall objective and a specific objectives of the research. So within research, then we have independent variables and dependent variables. But in between, we want to find out certain specifics of the research, so specific objectives of the research. Can they be considered as moderating variable that lead us towards the dependent variable? The answer, so this answers to our specific objectives.
So the answers to all the specific objectives.
Yes, can this be moderating variables or intervening variables that lead us to the dependent variable? So answers to specific objectives.
Okay, so Madam Aurelia, I would ask anyone that has that to answer as I come with it. Anyone would like to answer on that?
How I've understood the question is we have our objective, and correct me, Marco, we have our objectives that we have set out that clearly state the independent and dependent variable. I think Marco is asking then, could we have probably specific objectives that are sort of leading to like are also moderating variables in themselves, trying to really answer the independent and dependent variable question. Am I getting it?
Yes, that's yeah. Actually, you got it completely right, because I think we do have the specific objectives and the answers. So once we answer them, then we can make the conclusion, and this then influences the strength between independent and dependent variables. So answers to our specific objectives are actually moderating variables in that case.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think you would say that. Let's hear from someone else. What do you think?
Okay, so actually you reminded me something, Marco. When you're stating your objective, what I'll do at the end, the last objective, it is important to bring in the either moderating or the intervening. For example, if I have my objectives on the relationship between being poor and short life, and I'm thinking about using an intervening variable of nutrition, you can bring it in as an objective on its own, whereby you want to look at you want to find out, if I put in a question, does nutrition intervene between being poor and short lifespan? So that means that when you're testing the others, You also want to test the intervening factor, which you can use maybe the things like the bootstrapping and what have you. So you can bring it down on the objectives for you to test it too, because you can conclude that actually nutrition does not have an intervening, does not intervene between being poor and short life. So that is a test on its own that you can conduct and at the end of your study.
Yeah, that's perfect. That actually answers the question, because I was thinking how to bring in this idea into my conceptual framework, but that is it. So thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll run through the chapter 3 because time is gone. So on the research methodology, we have the main checklist that you can use to find out if you're really doing enough. So the first thing that you look at is, what is the study about? That one comes in the research design. Why is the study being made? Where will this study be carried out? That brings in the location of your study. What type of data is required? So is your data quantitative, that is numerical, or is it qualitative, that is non-numerical? So if I want to look at something like age and the lifespan and what we had earlier, that could be quantitative because you can measure it. If I want to look at maybe something like the behavior of preschool students, that can become a qualitative study. So what type of data do you need to use? You're going to state there. One tip I'm going to give you. Normally, most of us like the quantitative because it's much easier, while other fields like the anthropology, I think you are going to prove me right or wrong, they might use more qualitative. But if you're not very sure and you want to first of all continue, then you can be deciding as you go on. You can have the two together. You can have quantitative and qualitative together. Then you can decide much later as you continue with your work. Then where will you get this data? Are you going to go to the field? Is it a census? Are you going to sample? What period of time of study is it included? Is it over a period of 10 years? Is it as it is happening today? So all these answers makes up your research design. What will be your sample design? Do you want to look at random or non-random? How are you going to collect your data? Are you going to use interviews? Are you going to use questionnaires? Are you going to observe? How will you analyze the data? Do you want to use the factor analysis? Do you want to look at correlation using the spaces? Do you want to look things like other inferential statistics? And in what style are you going to report it? Is it in tabular forms? Is it using graphs? Is it using prose? So if you're going to answer all these questions, then your chapter 3 is done. This is where the entire research design comes in. So one of the tips that I'm going to give, I'm trying to be a bit faster on this. One of the tips that I'm giving, always think about your research methodology at the beginning of your study. So when you're trying to, when you're trying to look at the, when you're trying to think about your topic, you can be answering some of these questions. Who am I going to ask these questions? Where am I going to get this data? What am I going to use? Always have the research methodology at the beginning of the study. Then remember that at this particular point, your research design, it brings in the entire logical and coherent manner of conducting your research. You're not doing the research yet, this is the proposal. But now at the research design, this is where you're trying to bring in the strategy of carrying out the entire research, which will bring in now the entire report, including the chapter 4 and chapter 5. And that makes this chapter to be very, very important. And Madam Aurelia, I would wish you to have this as a whole topic on its own, because it's one of the most important parts of the research proposal.
Noted.
Thank you. So very fast, when you're doing your research design, you need to think about what type of design are you going to be using. Is it descriptive, where you're looking at the current status of variables? Is it correlational, where you're looking at the relationship between variables? Is it experimental? Mostly if you're doing a science background, then you might need to go to the lab, and that's a research design on its own. So very important, the sampling technique. How are you going to collect the data? So you can imagine if I want to look at the education performance in Nairobi, in Kenya. It's not possible to go to all the students in Nairobi, mostly when I'm doing academic research. The resources do not allow me. The time I have doesn't allow me. So you need to sample your work. So you need to think about who is your population. Maybe it is my students in high school in Nairobi. What is your sampling unit? It could be students in Form 2. What is the size sample? Maybe I want to look at, assume 50 students. What are the parameters of interest? Could they be male students who are 17 years of age? Then what sampling procedure do I want to use? Is it random? Is it non-random? So if you answer some of these pointers that I've put, then you're able to bring in your research design together. So when you're trying to think about your sampling procedure, very important, you need to identify if it's going to be random, that is probability. And this one composes some aspects like simple random, stratified random, cluster sampling. And I know we've covered these in our statistics or quantitative techniques courses. Anyone that is here, I know you've covered a part of it. Then you can also choose a non-probability where you're looking at purposive, quota sampling, convenience, and what have you. And I'm trying to pose a question, which one is better? Someone will say, I would prefer random, others I'll prefer non-probability. However, remember, it's not about what you want or what you think it's better as a researcher. It depends on the kind of research that you're undertaking. So I've given an example. If you want to study the economic conditions of people in a few villages, you can use convenience. The reason being that, which villages can I reach? Which one can I use a characteristic? For example, where do you have small-scale farmers? So this one you can apply the non-random or the probability sampling. But if I want to use something like the performance of students, then it's very hard to use convenience sampling in this case. So you might have to go the random way and choose something like the simple random method or the stratified method or what have you. So what you're going to choose, what type of procedure you're going to use, it's dependent on your type of research and on the background. Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? That's why it's very important for you to identify at the beginning what kind of study you're going to be using. So then we have the data collection instruments, which you have to identify still. How are you going to get this data? So you have chosen you're going to use a random sampling method on students in high school. Then how do you collect this data? Questionnaires. Am I going to interview them? Am I going to do the focus group discussions? Will I sit down and observe their behaviors and what have you? So the data collection instruments, this is what will help you to get the information which you're going to analyze. Then now you can continue and make recommendations or conclusions if your hypotheses were right or they were wrong. So very important, choose the instrument depending on your study. Then I'm going to take a very short time to explain the two. You need to find out what's your validity and reliability of your study. Validity, you want to look if your instrument that you've chosen measures what it's supposed to measure. So assume that you want to use a questionnaire. Is it measuring what it's required? So there are three types of validity that you need to look at. There's a content validity. Is your questionnaire adequately covering the content of your topic? You can look at the criterion. What is the success of measures that is used in terms of relevance? The questions you have, are they relevant? Are they free from bias? And are they reliable? And you can also use the construct validity, whereby you want to look at the correlation between what you have and the suggested theoretical suggestions. So content validity, you can carry this out with your supervisor. That's a subject matter, whereby they look through the questionnaire and they can tell you that you've covered all the areas of your topic or did not. Construct, you need to analyze your information. You can use tests like the factor analysis and correlation test. And to advise you before you start getting worried, this is available on your software, on your statistical software. Just put it in your SPSS on your starter, and it is going to analyze for you, and you can tell if the construct validity, it is valid or not valid. Then on the construct validity, we are saying that you can use the correlation coefficient. Reliability, you want to look if the instrument provides consistent result. If someone else was to take your work and carry it out much later or somewhere else, are they going to get the same results? So you want to look at the stability, that is the consistency of results, if someone else was to do it at another time or a different place, and the equivalence, that is how much error is likely to be introduced if someone else was to use your instrument somewhere else or at a different period of time. So this is what reliability tests. So one of the most common ways of testing your reliability, it's the internal consistency, whereby we calculate the Cronbach's alpha. And like I advised you, still don't get worried. these particular calculations or these terminologies, you can run them through your statistical software. You could be using SPSS, you could be using Stata. Once you enter your information, they're able to give you the convex alpha, and you can interpret, is it above the 0.5 or is it less than 0.5? So like I said, I'm trying to be very fast, and I hope you're going to have an opportunity to look at these a bit deeper. So after that, you need to identify how you're going to analyze your work. Are you going to use descriptive statistics, percentages? Are you going to be using the measures of central tendency, things like the mean, median? Are you going to be using the deviations, the measures of dispersion? So you need to identify this on your proposal. You need to guide the person who is reading how you're going to analyze your work. Are you going to use inferential statistics? Which one are you going to use? Is it the ANOVA? Is it the MANOVA? Is it using the factor analysis for qualitative and what have you? So it's very important that you know how you're going to analyze your work and you state it on your proposal. Then finally, you need to have references of all the work that you've conducted in your work. So we have different ways of referencing, the most common being the APA, the MLA, the Harvard, and Chicago. How do you know which one to use? Kindly look at the guideline of your institution. Some institutions insist on APA, others MLA, and what have you. And some of the resources that I would advise you to look at to help you with your referencing, we have the Purdue, all these ones you can get online. We have things like Zotero. Zotero is very good. What happens is from chapter 1, once you get your work, just put them on the Zotero, and at the end of your work, you just analyze it, and everything that you conducted towards your proposal is going to be run, and it's going to be present on your references. You can use a Mendeley. These are softwares that you can put in your laptop, and I can promise you, once you have those, it's going to be very, very simple for you to carry out the referencing of your work. Then finally, you need to give the appendices of everything that you stated in your proposal. The data instruments, if it's a questionnaire, present it on the appendices. The letters of submission, is there any map of the location? All those should appear on your appendices. So that is the end, that is the entire of your research proposal. And once you have that, I can promise you that you're going to have a very successful report. So I hope it has helped. I hope I've added some knowledge. And that's the end of my presentation, and I'm open for any question. Thank you for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Stellah, for that engaging session. Very packed, and but nonetheless very detailed. And I think looking at the chart, it's a good signpost for people now who are developing their proposals to have sort of a direction in terms of how they're going to proceed. I hope you will share with us the slides. There is high demand for your slides. Sure. Those who are in the journal club, we always share in the club. Those who are giving their emails, we will also send you, immediately we get through the email, and then you will be able to get the chat. So thank you so much, Stellah. I can see we have 5 minutes for questions. Keep them brief, and let's start. Itzai, your hand is up.
Thank you, Stellah, thank you so much for the excellent presentation. Actually, I think now I will be able to write my proposal, but is it possible that you can give like a summary on the problem statement? Thank you.
Okay, let's take two, then you can okay. Take that. Anyone else with a question? Paris, you're unmuted.
Thank you, Paris here. Thank you, Stellah, for the great presentation. Unfortunately, I've gone very fast on the research method, which is, I think, the backbone of a research paper. So my question was the last part of it about the reliability of the data, the instruments. I'm thinking most of this is more related to quantitative. Is this applicable to if you are doing a qualitative study? For those guys who are in sociology and anthropology, who are not going to explore this kind of testing, is it a must, or is it applicable if you have, regardless of the university or if the university insists, what happens?
Ella, you can take those two.
Okay. So I'll first answer the second one about the qualitative study. So yes, this is applicable for both quantitative and qualitative. Remember, when talking about validity and reliability, it's very different from data analysis. What you're telling us is validity of your research instrument, reliability of your research instrument. So since even for the qualitative, you're also using the research instrument, it is important, it's compulsory for you to find out if it's valid and if it's reliable. I understand that most of the qualitative, you could be using interviews. For you to do an interview, you need an interview guide. So once you do your interview guide, you want to find out, is it really valid? Is it answering everything in your topic? And you also want to find out the reliability. If someone else came and took this interview guide and they went and interviewed them somewhere else, or interviewed maybe in the next 5 years, will they get consistent information? So the answer is, irrespective of institutions, it applies for both quantitative and qualitative because everyone is using a research instrument. Is it clear?
Yeah, thank you, Stellah. But I'm just my concern was more on the measurement. You know, you can't measure the tool, whatever tool we are using. So unlike the quantitative, you run through and it will show you the results, the tests, and those percentages and those agreement levels. For the tool, for us to, I don't know, I just need some help on how you validate, how you can run it to validate it and to say now this is a level.
So if I take an example of validity, and the most common that almost every institution uses, it's the content validity. So if your instrument, let's assume it's an interview or the focus group.
Thanks for the great session.
Or the focus group. It means that what happens is that when you give your supervisor and they want to look at if it relates to, if it covers the entire subject matter or the entire objectives of your study, that already it's part of validity. You've already carried out the content validity part of it. If you look at the construct validity, factor analysis is actually a qualitative measure. So what you're measuring, remember, it is the instrument. If it is interviews, you have an interview guide. That is what you want to measure through. If you're looking at focus group, you have a guide that you are using. So what you're measuring here or what you're carrying out, it's your instrument. By your supervisor looking at it, that's already a validity. They are doing the content validity. By you doing the factor analysis, that's a qualitative measure. That's already a constant validity. So it applies even for qualitative.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one question, please?
Sure.
Out of the different research designs that have been talked about, I don't know, there's one research design which I think is usually left out, especially for those who are not in social sciences.
Yeah.
And this is called design research. And I don't know, maybe out of your own experience, maybe it's not something that you maybe have not come across or whatever, but for example, in information systems, you might want to actually design a model or actually design a software, and then maybe later on compare its performance with another one. And this is one area that is it's rarely covered because a lot of the research is usually about, collecting data using questionnaires and, taking random samples and all that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe in future we can also have sessions that really also focus on design research.
Is it different from experimentation? Yes.
Yeah, I've not delved deeply into that, and maybe it could be part of experimentation.
Yeah.
It could be experimentation. The only problem that I have with this idea of experimentation is that it seems to focus a lot on cause and effect. But what if you're just trying to design something?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's something to look at. I actually never thought about that, but that's important. We need to look into that. Thank you.
Hello, Stellah.
Hello.
based on what you have just said, I'm into social sciences, and I'm trying to come out with an intervention. I mean, I'm doing an interventional study, and I'm supposed to come out with a model where I will use to help people who are 45 years and above, and they are into the teaching field, to help them prepare themselves before retirement. So it is an experiment that I see it, but because when I contacted my supervisors, they told me that once it is not a laboratory study, I should call it an interventional study. So I don't know whether with issues of software design is in the same way that he's talking about, or is different in terms of the design.
So from how you're putting it, it feels like what our previous guest was talking about, the design research, which is something that you need to look at. But I'm wondering, could we put it among the quasi experiment?
Hi, Stellah.
Yes, it can be a causal experiment, but because I'm dealing with human beings, I wouldn't be comfortable using the word experiment, but I'll title it an interventional study. But in terms of the design, once we don't have something like an interventional design, it will be causal experiment.
Yes.
Okay, Stellah, I think I have a name for that.
Okay.
Yeah, it is called human-centered design for both Conrad and and the other person. So whatever you are doing, you're doing something called human-centered design, where you're designing a software or a program involving humans and involving them in each step of your design. So there's a design that we call human-centered design. Maybe you can read more on it. I can share some materials with you later.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. William, have you got that?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yes, very informative. Thank you. Thank you.
I think, Stellah, you'll answer the question from Idzai. Then I think we will go and we will wind up the discussion. I've seen the request to have the research methodology. I hope, Stellah, you can have us again so that we can have that in detail. And as we always say in the journal club, the best way to learn is to put to practice. If you attend seminars, theoretically, you're not applying seminar after seminar, you will find you have a pile of seminars you've attended, but you've not written anything. So my plea is that once we have this session, as we plan with Stellah to have the methodology, go start off on the background, on the statement of the problem, on your objective, so that even when you come back, you have something on the table that we can be able to discuss and move on. So Stellah, Idzai's question.
So if I can remember the question, it was about the
statement
summary
of the problem. Yeah, I
summary
think
of the statement of the problem. I think I'm losing it. So like we said, for the problem of the statement, the main pointers that you can use, or what I would summarize, I would say that this is where and when the problem is arising, who the problem is affecting, and what attempts are being made to solve the problem, and what are the objectives of your study. So if you can answer those particular questions, those specific questions, then you're able to come up with a problem statement. So I don't know what type of summary that you need. Maybe you could clarify on that. I've just brought out the slide.
Yeah, what I want, I think you've explained it, but if possible, because actually I'm trying to write something, as Valeria said, that after every session you have to try to write something. I have something which I put on paper. Then I received a comment which says, your problem statement is not clear, so I can't understand your research.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the thing. So when I was saying kindly explain, actually I want to pick Where did I miss it? Thank you.
Okay. And actually, what you just said, that's normally a very common comment that comes up on proposals. So don't feel bad about that. It's very common that you have it, but you're told it's not really clear. And what I'd say is that go back to your work and look if everything you have is covering the specific areas that we've identified. Where, the when, the who, what has been said about it, and what you want to achieve about it. So if you look at your description in relation to these particular questions, you can tell what is being left out. And I think if you use those pointers, then you can be able to identify what did you leave out for you to make it clear. But that's a very, very common comment when it comes to most of the problem statements in most of the researches, that is not clear. You're not really bringing in the problem. So if you can look in relation to what we've stated the questions, then you can tell which particular area did you leave out. Then if it's not clear, I'll be willing to help you identify which area.
Is it me or is it Stellah hanging? Hello, is it?
Yeah, I think it's Stellah.
Okay. All right. So I think we will, as she finds the network, I think we will. Stellah, you had finished?
Can you get me now?
Yes.
Yes, I finished. Itzai, did you get me?
Yes, Stellah. I think I'll look at it again, and I realize from your explanation is what I'm missing is what is the precise issue that research will address. I think that's that's what I'm missing, and I will try to work on it.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I think it's very always the problem statement. The problem is derived from literature, where what others have before you have talked about. Sorry. So read, so that you can be able to have good grasp.
Thank you so much. I think I will go back and read again on my literature. Thank you.
Yes. So let us end here, because I know this topic is very broad. We may find ourselves in the morning here. So so it's been a pleasure meeting all of you. Apparently the journal clubs are full. They are full now. It's usually 3 of them, 257 members each. So we cannot admit more, but we are going to see what to do. What we will do, we will save the chat and your emails, send you the presentation so that you can start working on your paper. And as we figure out how to handle those who want to join the journal club. But this is part of the activities we have in the club, where we invite a subject matter expert to come and talk to us about a topic, and then we can learn from that.
May I suggest something, Maria?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we can take the younger people, especially those who are undergrads, and put them in one of them so that they create space for the others. I don't know if that can help.
Okay, we'll see. That's an option. We will see how to create room. And I wish you well. Stellah, I've also gotten the cough. It's contagious. It's not corona.
Thank you, Stellah.
Thank you so much for coming. And
yes,
we have another session on Saturday for those who are working on qualitative research. We have a session on proposal writing for qualitative research. So watch out for that, so that then you can have your needs of qualitative study addressed as well. For those who are doing mixed methods, it's good to attend Saturday, 10 to 12 East African time. Join us then this Saturday. So I wish you well, be blessed, and watch out for the slides. Stellah, if you can send me the slides once you're done, as soon as possible, then I can send them tonight and we get that done. I wish you the very best.
Thank you.
Asante sana.
Bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Oh, let me save the chat before. Okay, I'm closing now. I've saved the chat. I wish you well. Bye-bye.